Good evening, St. Louis, and welcome into City Central Postgame right here on STL Sports Central, presented by our friends at DraftKings Sportsbook and also our partners now at Home Bank. Right now, the City Central Postgame is brought to you by our business banking partners at Home Bank. From business lending to everyday banking, Home Bank has been with us since day one here at STL Sports Central as a trusted partner. Businesses aren't just about numbers, guys. It's about relationships. And with Home Bank, those relationships make all the difference. Home Bank is the team behind our team at STL Sports Central. Visit myhomebank.bank. That's myhomebank.bank, or call 855-577-2001, 855-577-2001. Home Bank, member FDIC, more than a bank. They're your business partner, and they will be bringing us our Home Bank money moment of the game later on here in this postgame. Unfortunately, guys, I don't think I could find one for St. Louis City SC. I've been trying, even in losses, for these postgame shows with our Home Bank money moment of the game to find a positive moment to talk about for the home team. Unfortunately, I could not find one tonight because this was a bad game. And it's a bad game at the end of a bad season. Bottom line, they get absolutely dominated 3-0 by LAFC. Disappointing match, but an unsurprising result in the end, because what did you expect that was really going to happen? LAFC, one of the best teams in the league for the entire season, and then they went out and added one of the best players in the world in Heung-min Son. What do you expect here? You tied them 2-2 earlier on in the season, but since then, you haven't gotten that much better, and they've only gotten better. Denny Bouanga was a dominant player before Son got there, but he has absolutely taken a complete next step in his ability to be a dominant, game-changing, and game-breaking player. It helps when you have somebody who takes the defensive impact that Son has been taking since he arrived in LA, but that's what's going to happen, and they dominated St. Louis City SC pretty much the entire game, and that's unsurprising. And let's talk about that domination. Taylor Twellman, he's going to talk about a St. Louis City game while it's happening. The gulf between LAFC and St. Plus City SC is easy for the eye to see. Bouanga has been unlocked with Son, but I watched this game with a keen eye on how does STL bridge this gap. Personnel plus tactics has a ways to go. Interesting offseason heading into season 4 in STL. And part of the context there is, of course, that they have now been eliminated from the playoffs officially, which means 2 out of 3 seasons that they've existed, they have not been a playoff team. And obviously, we know what happened in year 1 when they win the West and then are bumped out in consecutive games by a mediocre Sporting Kansas City side. So let's get into what Taylor's talking about here. Personnel plus tactics has a way to go. I think that's a big topic from today's game. If you were watching the broadcast like I was, they talked a lot about the tactics tonight, about how the built-in way that St. Louis City plays exposes their sixes, it exposes their fullbacks, and therefore it puts their center backs on islands in really unfortunate situations. And we'll talk about some of those moments here in a little bit, because we're coming on here a little bit later after the Mizzou post game. So we were able to do the post game show. So we talked to David Critchley, and he came down on obviously the posture of the team, the defending, the individual defending in the moments, because they talked about how you have to put space, or you have to leave. You have to make sure they're not getting behind you, they being the LAFC attackers. But he also pointed out how you, at some point in the play, you have to step up and make a play. And obviously I'm referring to both the Timo Baumgartel play on the second goal by Denny Bouanga, and then also, in my opinion, although it didn't seem like he was highlighting this because he did say Alfred Morales had some good aggressive moments, I think you also need to highlight just the absolute week and a half that Son had at the top of the box for goal number 3 in the game, in his second goal of the game, because he had the entire day just to sit there and just pick a spot. I saw one of our friends, I think it was Jeremy Clement, who tweeted out that he just passed the ball into the back of the net, and that's kind of what it was. You had a banger shot from Bouanga in the first goal, and then goal number 3 is Son just taking this moment to find the exact place where he has to go. So when you're talking about the tactics, this has been an issue now for 2 years. Going back to mid-season under Bradley Carnell in year 1, this team has been playing a style with this 4-2-3-1 where, because of the way the 2 wide 10s and the 3 in the 4-2-3-1, the way that they attack and get forward is essentially as attacking wingers, that exposes a lot of your flanks. And to account for that, a lot of the width by this team is created by the fullbacks. The problem is, though, when you have a back 4, and you have 2 attacking fullbacks, or 2 fullbacks who play on a high line, well, then you're either going to deal with your center backs on islands all the time, which is what City Seal deals with a lot, because one of the things you need to put in there is you need to have sixes who are consistently playing, the defensive position they need to. And when Edward Leuven and Chris Durkin are back and playing in the defensive line, they're great. They're fine sixes. They're Edward Leuven is a very good defensive six for how great of an offensive player he is. Durkin's supposed to be the more defensive player of the two, and he just isn't in position enough. When he's in position, Chris Durkin makes plays fine, but he's not in position enough. And that's then the issue, not just with Chris Durkin. At the back half of year one and early in year two, that was the issues at time with Jabulo Blum. That's why he's not here anymore. And so this has just been a years-long issue with St. Louis City SC. In my opinion, it's a bigger issue than the fact that they haven't had a lot of great talent at left back, because I think a lot of the problem with left back, and now we're seeing it with right back, and the fact that they can't decide between Totland and Vollum. The problem with the fullbacks and the problem with evaluating the fullbacks in this system is that what the fullbacks are required to do is inherently broken unless these fullbacks are the most talented player on the roster. I mean, you need Alphonso Davies, David Alaba type stuff here. I mean, you need guys who are able to cover byline to byline for 90 minutes while also being one of the most important passing outlets for your team by throwing in crosses from the flank. And at the same time, they always need to be covering their zones defensively because your sixes aren't consistently in position enough. The fullbacks on this team have been in no-win, lose-lose situations for the overwhelming majority of the 3 years this team has existed. And so, yeah, the talent level at the fullback spots hasn't been the highest for a defensive group or for any group on this roster. That's no doubt, but it's been a combination of a lack of high-level talent with a system that's asking, jags, just guys, to do high-level things. And that's what Taylor's getting here and talking about how personnel and tactics has a way to go. Other people are going to highlight not having enough attacking players. And in a game like this, when the attack was absolutely stagnant, that's a fair thing to highlight. But I think starting from the back and working forward makes sense based on what this team is trying to do, which is they're trying to, and I know it seems odd, but they're trying to win the offensive game with effort and numbers up top. And you can say, fine, don't do that anymore. Win it with talent. That's fine. You're going to have to spend eight or 10 million. And that's a completely reasonable ask for this team going into year 4 when they want to be a playoff team. Because if you go across every team, if you want a top attacking designated player, you have to shell out at least $6 million plus another $1 million or $2 million on the salary. You've got one guy making $2 million in Marcel Hartle. They haven't spent more than $4.5 million yet on a transfer fee. They're probably going to have to add a second $2 million player, and they're going to have to break that $4 million transfer fee, top right now. Bottom line, they're going to have to do those things. Now, they're not going to bring in a guy like Son, who's costing you $21 million. That's not happening. That's pie in the sky BS. You don't need to buy into that. But they do need to add more talent. But in one way or another, either the attacking talent has to get better so that they can pull back some of the numbers and keep a six back every once in a while, or a fullback back every once in a blue moon so they actually have defensive numbers, or they're going to have to fill those DPs or U22 spots more likely, and maybe a couple TAM slots with more talented fullbacks if they're going to keep asking these guys to do this. And we don't know if they're going to. Do things change under a new sporting director? Do things change under the head coach he hires? Diego Higliani, and I know I'm going on a tangent here, but I'm going to keep rolling with it because who's going to stop me? You can jump in the chats here. That's one of my favorite things about working here at STL Sports Central is we can get in conversations with you guys on the chats. If you follow me on Twitter, I like getting into the back and forth. So if you want to get into a back and forth, if you want to stop me from this tangent, go ahead and jump in the chat, and that'll stop me from the tangent. In fact, before I talk about what Diego Gigliani has said about the future of St. Louis City SC, let's go to Eggplant Emoji, who was in here early and who was in here often, and we appreciate that. That went exactly as expected and really shows how much work City needs to go in order to be competitive again. Yeah, I think saying, well, they can't run with LAFC, that means they can't be competitive. There's levels to this. You can be competitive without being able to run with the Heung-min Son version of LAFC. And, if you want to have a not silver lining, but if you want to have a more positive bent on this, you can look at you lost because of a bunch of big moments where you stupidly made huge mistakes. That's one way to look at it. And there seemed to be a couple talks, a little bit from Critchley and guys about how, well, you didn't play terrible, but we just had these huge mistakes. I would disagree with that, and I have the numbers to back it up because I put it up there in the title, and I'm going to use it here again. Domination is the only word for this game. I mean, and these were the numbers in like the 95th minute, so one or two of these things might have changed. Everything on the left number is, of course, LAFC. Everything on the right is St. Louis City SC from this game. 1.76 to 0.35 XG, 1.71 to 0.17 open play XG. Open play, by the way, is just anything that's not a set piece goes under open play XG. So you weren't. It's not like they beat you on a bunch of corners and a bunch of free kicks. When the ball was out there and everyone was running, you got absolutely ran. 21-6 in total shots, 7-1 total shots on target. I mean, just by that math, you had no chance in tonight's game. You put one shot on target and they scored 3 goals. What the hell are you going to do? 12-5 on shots inside the box. 328 to 176 passes in the opposition's half. Almost got doubled up there. 36 to 10 touches in the opposition box. You certainly got tripled up, almost quadrupled up on that one. And then I like this one. Players with multiple shots in this game. LAFC had 6 players with multiple shots. St. Louis City SC had 2, or had 1, excuse me, and that was João Klaus. He was the only player with multiple shots. They only had 3 players with multiple touches in the opposition's box. That was Klaus, that was Hartl, and surprisingly, Kyle Hebert had 2. So you can tell me, well, we just had these big moments where we let them into the game when we made big mistakes. That's not a couple big moments. Like Buanga scored on like a 0.21 XG shot. That first one, even though it was a good steal, it was a banger of a goal. So they didn't beat you just because they didn't beat you on these easy goals. They scored some bangers and then they didn't score the easy goals. So you got lucky this wasn't 5-0. That's, in my opinion, the interpretation I have from this game, watching it play out in front of me for 90 minutes. And then you look at the numbers, and I know a team scoring 3 goals on 1.71 XG isn't the most, stat guy thing to comment about. Usually 1.71 isn't going to give you 3, but a lot of times it does. So, I mean, they, in my opinion, they got walloped today, and they really weren't in the game for a while. And why did that happen? That's a good question. I asked both Marcel Hartl and Edward Leuven, talked a lot about the passing and the midfield, the frustration from what LAFC was doing against them. But to their point, it was failures on their own part. And again, you're trying to get the answers out of this, guys. You don't want to name any names or get them to like call out their teammates, but in a crappy game like that, they're going to call out themselves and their teammates to a point. And both Marcel Hartl and Edward Leuven made slightly different points, but Hartl's point was just that they would, every time they defended well against LAFC and they got the ball back, they couldn't do anything in turning it around. And I know that the few moments they had were a couple good transition moments, but to Marcel Hartl's point, I want to point out that two of the goals that got scored against them are based entirely off defensive and passing errors. Obviously, there's the Volum turnover that turns into Denny Buanga's first goal, but that second goal is they're just staring right at. I mean, they're just letting him right through. So it's a pretty bad play overall. I mean, they turn the ball over, and that's why the Sixers are so out of position. That's something that we're not focusing on one of those plays. Is that that's why they're so out of position, is because there's a quick turnover in the midfield that allows them to go in the transition. It makes the defense look bad. It makes the Sixers look bad, but it's a turnover by a completely different position group who actually puts the defense in this bad position that they then allow to score from. So that's why I think it's important when Marcel Hartl points out that we're defending, we get the ball, and then we immediately turn it over. We have to go defend for another minute. That is a frustrating, a hard game for a team to play through it. And that's clearly, I think, an issue when you watch it over and over again. They turn the ball over, and this is not a tonight issue. How many times? I mean, Abo, eggplant emoji, Samuel Howe, you're all in the chat right now. Thank you guys very much. You're all in the chat right now. You guys have heard me talk about this entire season. I mean, how many times have we talked about stupid turnovers, lazy passes in the midfield, being the thing that actually caused the defensive moment. And yes, you can highlight that the defender didn't play the moment correctly, and I'd already talked about how Timo didn't play that moment, and Alfie didn't play that moment correctly. No doubt there. But you can draw it back to 2 or 3 passes earlier and say, oh, this player tried a lazy pass, or this player tried a pass and another player was making a lazy run, and so therefore they turned it over. You can draw it back a lot of times, and that was the issue tonight. And so yes, there were defensive screw-ups, but that's why it's so important that Marcel Hartl mentions that they couldn't get anything going when they did make good defensive plays. And it was frustrating, and it opened themselves up on the back end. Moving into Edward Leuven's answer about the problem, he said the same thing. The receivers of the ball were doing a very poor job today. Abo, 100% right on the Alfredo moment. He had just subbed on and only played to contain. Yeah, I'll give Critch credit. Critch probably is thinking about the moments after that where Morales was playing a very solid game. He had just come on, but yeah, him just letting Son have all that time in the box, that's going to be extremely annoying. Edward Leuven's thing that jumped out to me was he said the receivers were bad. Essentially, they didn't have a plan. Essentially, they get the ball. What's my next move? And yeah, that's a self-criticism for Edu. He's a receiver a lot, and he had some not great moments. He even self-said that he didn't have a great moment tonight. The thing that jumped out to me from Edu is that he said the worst player on the field tonight for City was usually the player who had the ball at their feet. And that quotes one thing with Edward Leuven. The worst player tonight was the player with the ball at their feet. And then the second one was that admitting that they played scared in the first half. That was something I think you could just feel. And I don't like to give a lot of credit to things that you just feel in the moment, because what is that really? But when a player then echoes your thoughts in the post game like that, and it's unprompted, it wasn't even a leading question. My question was just, why was the midfield bad? And eventually he gets to, we played scared in the first half. That's the worry when you have a big name like Heung-min Son, who has a decade plus of Premier League dominance on his plate. Can't play scared, guy. I mean, scared money don't make money. I tweeted that out before the post game hit, and I didn't think we were going to get somebody to admit they play scared. But there's Edward Leuven, always candid, always being honest, an absolute dream for the media, and admitting that he thought they played scared. That's a huge problem. And I think when you hear, well, the game plan was good and things like that, but then you see that mindset, I think it's fair to ask some questions about how a professional team, I always say in some of these criticisms, they on scholarship too. Essentially saying you can't just criticize your team for failing to make a play because somebody else is also getting paid millions of dollars to make a play on the other side. That's the nature of the game. But you're on scholarship too, St. Louis City SC. You can't be playing scared in a game like that. You can't show up, fishy in that moment. And that's kind of what it seemed like they did from that comment. And that's worrisome. It's the end of a bad season, so there's not a lot of things maybe that are going to give you a ton of confidence if you're playing for this team. So maybe that's part of it. But that was a disappointing realization. You saw it. If you watched tonight's game, you saw a team that was playing scared. Sigma House says, you're saying we don't have a chance. Yes, they have been officially eliminated, as it says in the title. They needed to win tonight. They needed a bunch of people to lose. As soon as the Bouanga goal happened, I stopped scoreboard watching to see if the people they needed to lose were going to lose, because I didn't think that St. Louis City was going to win this game, 3-2 or anything like that. If it got into a shootout, LAFC was going to win it, and they completely dominated for the most part. And Samuel House points, 0 goals makes it very hard to win. Yes, it does. And Samuel House says, I wonder why the players have doubts. And that's a fair point. I did think it was one of the things I thought was very interesting from Edward Leuven was one of his early comments where he said that, let's see if I can find my Edward Leuven thread from the post game. See, here was some positivity from him. LAFC was the way better team, but we've proven in the past so many times that we are good enough to keep up with the best teams in the league, but it also shows against a team like that, you can't allow yourself to make mistakes. And he was talking about them failing to make the playoffs. St. Louis City is a club that wants to be a playoff team, and we should be. The team gives us all the resources. And he went on to give a longer answer than that, but that's what I was able to tweet in the moment. And I think that's an interesting perspective from a guy like Edward Leuven, mainly because for me, Edward Leuven has a lot of reasons. I'm not going to say all the reasons. Edward Leuven has a lot of reasons to say, listen, I love St. Louis City. I love that I was able to be a part of, but it's time for me to go back to Germany and make my personal life a little bit easier to handle. I would completely understand, and I've talked about this before, I would completely understand if he's saying, listen, Lutz Pfannenstiel brought me here. He's gone. Me and him had a deeper relationship than just, sporting director and player. He understood me on a personal level with the things I'm going through. The things I'm going through are very real and they're problematic, and they put a lot of strain on me emotionally, put a lot of strain on my family. And for him to come out and say something like that, I mean, he doesn't have to make that comment. And I think that says a lot about what the majority of players actually do think about their time here in St. Louis City. I truly believe that despite some of the dysfunction, and there has been obviously a lot of dysfunction through all the coaches and now with the sporting director firing and things like that, I think a lot of these players really do enjoy playing here. And I think the team does give them a lot of resources and makes a lot of things easy for them. They have Class A facilities. There's no doubt about that. Everything's close with the stadium and the practice facilities and the training fields and all that. So I think there's a lot of reasons why players who have been here will want to stay here for a long time, even if there's extraneous reasons why they wouldn't want to. To your point, and people have mentioned this too, I do wonder if you're on the outside looking in at all that dysfunction, do you want to be a player for St. Louis City in the future if you're not already here, if you're not already seeing what's inside? And listen, it's really funny. I've made this joke as well about how there's been a lot of times this season where I'm talking about either the Cardinals or City, and I feel like I'm making a lot of the same points for both teams. And in the same week, both these teams have been officially eliminated from the playoffs. And in both cases, it was a very slim chance in a bad season that was mostly aided on by other teams refusing to win, not because you were doing anything special in the back half of your season. They've had weirdly congruent seasons in a really crappy, unfun way that it hasn't been that fun to cover. But it just says a lot about the struggles right now going on in St. Louis sports. And thank God the Blues are back, and we have Mizzou football and SLU basketball, because at least those programs are and should be winning. Eggplant emoji. Since they won't be in the playoffs, can we skip ahead to the offseason? Should they re-sign Berkey or reallocate those dollars to fill needs elsewhere? Re-sign Berkey. Absolutely. I think Roman Berkey's incredible. His numbers are a little bit muted from his first two seasons, which I always need to underline. His first two seasons are two of the best seasons in the last decade of the MLS. If you extrapolate to the last 15 years, because those are all the numbers I have available, it's two of the best, like 12 to 14 seasons in the last 15 years of the MLS. And again, the numbers have been muted this year. He dealt with an injury, and he's dealt with a back line that has been a sieve for most of the year. So I'm giving him a little bit of a pass. Berkey's a leader in the locker room. Absolutely, you re-sign Berkey. Do you do it at the DP level? Let's try to figure out how we don't do that, because I mean he's you don't have a transfer fee tacked onto him anymore. So getting him under the DP level and then onto a TAM deal should be doable, especially because he's getting a little bit older. So make that happen. Get Berkey. And again, that's all salary money, and that's a good allocation of that money. The big spending, and again, that's going to be, what are you going to give Berkey? You're going to give him a 3-year deal. You're going to pay him, again, you're going to pay him TAM level, so you're going to pay him, 1.5 million, 1.7 million per year. That's fine. The big question is the $6 to $8 million swing on a big player, or the 3 to 4, or the 3 deals for all $3 million. And I throw that out. I disagree with this comment. I'm not sure I don't even know what the name is. I'm sorry. I do not speak that language. Except for the first goal, STL was pretty good. I mean, STL didn't get trounced, but if I need to throw up the numbers again from this game, I'll disagree with the statement that after the first goal that STL City was pretty good. They got walloped in this game. But going back to the Berkey question, I still think, and I've talked about this before, and I'll just reiterate it. This team needs depth of talent. They don't just need talent, they need depth of talent, which in my opinion means you have to sign 3 players, and if all of them cost $3 million, fine. But that would be a big swing, and I know people aren't going to like hearing this, but if City has spent $4 million on Klaus and almost $4 million on Fall, I think it was, what was it, 3 even, I think is what it's come out to be. So like $3.5 million on Klaus, $3 million on Falu Fall. Going out in one offseason and spending $3 million on 3 more players would be a big swing. Would it be the big swing people want? No, but it would be increasing the transfer spending year to year, and it would be a big move for St. Louis City, and it'd be important too because again, they need fullback depth. We've talked about that. Maybe they can get it by getting Devin Padelford on a sweetheart deal from Minnesota, but I think you've seen from the last two games, or the last game, and just from their reluctance to play Totland, that they don't think they have that fullback talent necessarily either. So spend $3 million on a fullback on a U22. If you go around the league, a lot of good young fullbacks are on U22 deals. Seems like a smart team building thing to copy. Bring in another attacker. I love Brendan McSorley and Mekhi Joyner. They should be starting. At least Mekhi Joyner should be starting next year, in my opinion. Obviously, we're seeing Brendan McSorley get some starts here now. Sangbin on a U22 deal, keep him rolling. Celio Pompeu, gave him a contract extension. It's not a big deal. You still have him, but you need to add more talent to just push that group and give you more flexibility as well. So $3 million on a young attacking winger, and then boost up the 6th spot. And that's maybe where I think you go big on the DP deal by spending $5 or $6 million on the transfer market to get a 25-year-old or something along those lines in on a DP deal. Maybe you go a little bit younger, you get a young DP deal and things like that. By the way, I know if you are intrigued by roster construction and things like that, Falu Fall could have been a youth designated player, which has slightly just different from being a regular designated player. Falu Fall could have been a youth designated player, but St. Louis City SC didn't want to give back half of the GAM they got from using the U22 model, where you have 2 designated players and 4 U22 slots. They didn't want to give back the $1 million in GAM they had, so they're going to stay, it seems. So they, at least for now, they stayed as a 2DP 4 U22 model, which means Falu Fall goes under the U22 part of the model. The thing with the roster construction is that we expect them to have at least 2 of those spots open, 1 DP spot and 1 U22 spot. The DP spot should be open because João Klaus should be bought down to a TAM player after his option is picked up. And then the U22 deal that should be opened up is that Chris Durkin ages out of his U22 deal and has an option for next year that they should not take his option, and if they do re-sign him, they should sign him on a reduced deal, if not let him walk. Either way, U22 spot opens up from Chris Durkin, DP spot opens up from João Klaus, and now you can go out and get your DP6. Abo, so you joined the club, DP winger. Hey, no, I was throwing that out as a potential that some people like you have commented on my Twitter very, very constantly, is that they want a DP winger. Abo, you are the leader of the fan group of paying $8 million to get a right winger. That's fine. I see your logic. I simply disagree with the realities that it's going to happen. And my whole thing is about managing expectations. And I could get up here and say they need to spend $10 million. They need to sign Josh Sargent. But why should I waste my time? I'm not here. I'm not trying to waste my time. I know people saying me talking about soccer is wasting my time anyway, but I'm not going to waste my time saying they're going to spend $10 million on a right winger, because it's not going to effing happen. let's pull back. I'll throw it out as a possibility, but if it is a DP winger, I think it's more like again a $4 million for like David Martinez that LAFC made, where it's a young player to grow with the trend of this team. That would be the DP winger. It's not going to be the big bad, dominant, A1 player that everyone thinks it's going to be, because that costs an unbelievable amount of money. I mean, look like at FC Cincinnati here. I'll actually let me go up. Let me download one of these things I've been working on. So I've been putting together these because MLS just released their roster profiles from the fall, which basically breaks down the roster. It says, what's a U22, what's a DP, who's a U22, who's a DP, so on and so forth. And over the last 2 weeks or so, I've been putting together essentially a rundown of all the DPs and U22s across the MLS. And I've tweeted out a couple of them, but let me just download one and kind of show you guys how they go and why these things fascinate me so much. And here's an example for one of them. I know I was going to use FC Cincinnati, but I don't have that one downloaded, so I'm gonna pull up the one I got from the Chicago Fire, who I know people are talking about him. By the way, they just they're all in on Chris Brady, their young goaltender. So I know we've had a lot of conversations about Roman Berkey potentially going to Chicago Fire. We know that he likes he likes a certain lady who lives up there, and so you can't blame him. This is what I'm working on, by the way, that I'm going to be releasing here in a couple of weeks as I put them all together. This is the Chicago Fire's profile, and what you have here is they run a 2DP 4 U22 profile, and so what you have here is their 4 U22s, and on the top there you have their 2 DPs. And so the big thing to break down here is Jonathan Bamba has, and by the way, I just want to say these stats are through match day 28. We are through match day 31 after today, or through match day 29. These stats are. I've been working on this over the last 2 weeks. I haven't updated everyone's stats as the last 2 games have gone, but these stats are maybe 2 weeks inaccurate for these Chicago Fire players, but nonetheless, everything else is accurate. So Jonathan Bamba cost the Chicago Fire 3.5 million euros. So bump that up to over $4 million as a transfer fee, and he's costing them $5 million in salary. Again, highlighting the highest paid player on St. Louis City SC right now is Marcel Hartl at like 2.3 million. So Jonathan Bamba is making 5 million, and Jonathan Bamba is not anywhere near the player that Marcel Hartl is for St. Louis City SC this year. Marcel Hartl is on like 4 or 5 top 10 lists. Bamba's on 1. Just top 10 stats, by the way, in MLS. Bamba has 9 goal contributions. His expected goal contributions is right around there. And if you look at his shot creating actions and goal creating actions, all of those are below Marcel Hartl. But Marcel Hartl was free as opposed to $4.5 million in transfer fee. And Marcel Hartl cost $2.3 million. Jonathan Bamba cost $5 million. On the flip side, because that's the crappy side, to Abo's point, they can take a swing like that, may not hit that level, but that's the price tier. Are you talking about $8 million? There's no, San Diego got Dreyer for 5. Yeah. And if they can hit on Dreyer, that's fine. But the problem is the majority of guys who produce like Andres Dreyer are going to be Hugo Kuipers, who cost you 11 million euros. We're talking $12 million for a guy who was a top scorer over in a lower European league. He cost them $12 million and his salary is $3.24 million. And yeah, his production is worth it, but that's the level you got to dip into when you're talking about these super high level prospects. And not always. You can make smarter moves. I mean, the other team that I have downloaded really quick has made a lot of smart moves, and that's the Columbus Crew. Although they've been struggling over the last few weeks, and Daniel Gazdag hasn't stepped up for them. His expected numbers, like João Klaus, like Marcel Hartl's, are a lot better than his actual numbers. But again, he cost them over $4 million, and he's getting paid right around what Marcel Hartl's getting paid, and Marcel Hartl's outproducing him. At the same time, the move that Abo's talking about, Andres Dreyer for $5 million, Diego Rossi, these stats are definitely inaccurate from him because he's had a couple big weeks. Although the Crew defense has been crap, and so they haven't taken all those points. Diego Rossi has been playing well. They got him for $6 million. And Abu Ali, they just added. He cost them about 7.5 million, 6.4 million euros, about 7.5 million. Now, again, both those guys costed bigger salaries. So this is my point: is you're going to have to pay another guy more than $2 million, like you are with Marcel Hartle, and you're going to have to spend $6 million. Columbus Crew is a great example, I think. We're talking about a mid-market like Columbus, Ohio, and look at two of their three DPs, $6 million buys who are impact forwards. This is, by the way, Abu Ali has scored a couple times for the Columbus Crew. Again, I'm 2 weeks off on these stats, and so I was just highlighting what he had done before he got to the Columbus Crew. So maybe this is the example you want to look at. Mid-market team had to shift things around, by the way, kind of mid-season. Maybe a former Columbus Crew GM in Corey Ray will be taking over St. Louis City, so maybe this is even a better thing to kind of focus on there. So there's maybe a comparison. The difference there is that their U22 roster, they've spent like $2 million on. I think they might have added, they have a second U22 that I haven't updated this with that I don't have off the top of my head. I think they paid $2 or $3 million for him. But St. Louis City did just pay, $3 million for a U22 and Falu Fall. But, this is, I want to throw this out just because people are undoubtedly right when they say St. Louis City needs to spend more and they need to take advantage of the open DP and U22 slots. But I do want to point out that the amount of guys who cost $5 million and produce at the top level, it's not a huge group. Dabo's point, Andres Dreyer is one of them, but it's not a huge group beyond guys like him. And the guys who do produce at huge levels cost just an unbelievable amount of money. And you can spend a lot, and sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. And let's pull up another one of these profiles because I didn't really plan to do this, so I gotta pull these up and download them off the fly. But this is I'm having fun with this conversation because this kind of stuff really, when it comes to the MLS, is one of the only thing that really gets me interested about the other teams. Is how are they doing their team building in compared to what St. Louis City is doing? Because I think it's all relative when you look at what these teams are doing and market size and how long you've been around and things like that. Samuel Howe, we could pay double. We could pay double for half the talent. I'm not really sure what that comment's supposed to mean, Samuel Howe. You're confusing me on that one. Look at Cincinnati here. Kevin Danke cost them 15.3 million euros, and his salary is 3.8 million. Evander cost them over $12 million and has a $3.2 million salary. Now, Evander undoubtedly worth the money if you can swing it, and this is FC Cincinnati. So you got to think, how long until a St. Louis compared to a Cincinnati can swing it. St. Louis is pretty sure is a bigger market than Cincinnati. How long until St. Louis can swing spending $30 million on two players across a year and a half or so is when these salaries or when the transfers took place. I think maybe 2 years. But at the same time, Danke has put up a lot of goals, but his expected numbers are down, which tells you that he's way overscoring what he should be doing, and he isn't actually producing that high of a level. His expected numbers are way lower than Marcel Hartle, and he cost almost $17 million. So this is why I think the comparison's simple, because one other thing I have to throw out there is, and also this is why I kind of got into the U22 stuff. There's going to be a move by St. Louis City in the next few years. They're going to spend $3 million on a player. They're going to spend $4 million on a player. And that player is going to completely bomb. And he's going to do nothing for this team. And this fan base is going to absolutely lose their shit when it happens. Because the way this fan base reacts to losing $700,000 to Nicholas Dewar, or how dare they spend $750,000 on Jake Girdwood Reich and him not immediately be a solid player at 20 years old. Every single team in this league, save St. Louis City and San Diego, every single team in this league has spent $3 million on a transfer and had that player do jack shit for their squad. That is just a fact of this league, and that is a fact of probably every single soccer league on this planet. You're playing with some risky elements in this game when you talk about the world game, how you're recruiting and things like that. And so the other thing that keeps jumping out to me as I go through all these lists, there's a $4 million transfer that's going to happen in the next 5 years that is going to break this fan base. And it's going to be really interesting to watch how it happens. Samuel House says Chicago player versus our guy. Yeah, I think you're talking about Hugo Kuipers. But again, Chicago player versus our guy. Hugo Kuipers cost Chicago like as much as the total cost of City's best 4 or 5 players. I mean, we're talking about $12 million in salary or $12 million in transfer fee. And I think it was a 3-year deal for $3.24 million. Let's call it $10 million. So we're looking at we're talking $22 million for the totality of the Hugo Kuipers deal. I mean, that's a huge chunk of St. Louis City's entire roster. You want to focus on Kuipers. I want to focus on Jonathan Bamba and how, look at that. That's a $4 million transfer, $5 million on salary. And he's just giving you what everyone tells me is bottom half production from a DP. That's a little worrisome, isn't it? I mean, I think for some people it might be. What about Georgios Koutsaias, one of their U22 players? They got him in the winter of 2023. That's when St. Louis City started, by the way, for $2.36 million. He's made 18 starts with them, and he's been loaned away to Lugano, I think, is it second division Spain? I don't even know. Off the top of my head. I mean, that's right. I mean, that's Giorgio Koutsaias right here. This is literally the Jake Girdwood Reich deal, except it cost them 3 times or 4 times what it cost St. Louis City SC. And it's happened over the course of a year longer. Leonardo Barroso, he's a 19-year-old who's appeared in 17 matches with 10 starts. That's pretty good. That's the kind of move I would love to see St. Louis City SC make for their U22. Go out this winter, get a 19-year-old from South America, stick him on the flank, and let him make some mistakes, give him some starts, and let him learn the game. Brian Gutierrez is a fantastic example of team building in the MLS. They signed him as a homegrown in 2020. They extend him in Adams as a U22 in 2023. And his goals plus assists has increased each year. He had 8 2 years ago. He had 9 last year. And at time of me making this graphic, which was 2 weeks ago, he had 10. Innocent J is a great another example. They spent $4 million on him this summer. His first MLS start came on July 16th, and he had started the last 5 straight. I think he started the last 2 games as well. I think he started the last 7 straight. He might have even finally got his first goal contribution. But this is the up and down of team building in MLS. And by the way, Chicago is a team that a lot of people have crapped on for being a bad organization. But this is the up and down of the MLS. This is why, and this is just, I'm just looking at the Chicago Fire. When you start going through every single one of these teams, the context of these moves really starts to lock in, and you start seeing that, there are definitely things to criticize. I'm not saying you guys are wrong for wanting them to spend more, but we just got to be realistic about the expectations. They should increase their spending every year in the transfer window up to a point. As a new club, you should increase your spending. You shouldn't, and if you have the money, just come out right out of the gate and throw these big cash deals out. That's fine. But in my opinion, my expectation for this club has always been increase the spending year by year. And if you make sales, I expect those sales to be turned around and spent. The issue is that they haven't really made any sales. They sold Nico Gioacchini for $2 million, and they've pulled some sell-on clause fees that are like 15%. They get 15% of what, a $2 million deal, a $3 million deal. What's that in the end? It's not that much money. So yeah, St. Louis City, and we keep coming back to this conversation every single one of these post games, and that's because this season's been lost and we don't have anything to play for. So we're talking about the offseason, and that's fine. I want to talk about the offseason as well. They open up a bunch of spots. Most of those will be on the supplemental roster. In fact, let's grab the MLS roster profiles, because if we're going to talk about all this stuff, we might as well just stop screwing around with the with everything I'm talking about. Well, all these supplemental roster spots are going to open up. You guys just need to see what I'm talking about here, because if you haven't seen these roster profiles, and I'm sure if you're a St. Louis City fan to the point where you're watching these post games, there's a good chance that you've seen these, because Matt Baker's always tweeting them out, Tom Timmerman's tweeting them out. Everyone who covers the team does a pretty good job of tweeting these things out whenever they get initially announced. I was out of town when they first got announced, so I was slow on the uptick, so you guys probably saw it before anything else. So here's when we talk about this, and I'll zoom in so you guys can see this in a separate profile. There we go. So when we talk about the team roster profile, I was showing you kind of my shorthand that I'm making for other teams so I can see it. This is what I'm talking about with St. Louis City when we talk about the team roster profile. This is publicly available. This is on the MLS website right now. Make this the easiest way for you guys to see it. It's on the MLS website right now, and basically you can see it there. Marcel Hartl and Zhao Klaus are the designated players. Songbing Jong, Chris Durkin, Falu Fall, Jake Reich are your U22s, and there's your 5 TAM level players: Berkey, Kessler, Leuven, Thomas Ostrak, and Cedric Teuscher. So just looking at this, again, you see that Zhao Klaus, although technically right now he can't be bought down, once his options picked up in the winter, he can be bought down from a designated player to a TAM level player. So that's where that designated player opens up. On the U22 side, the Australian team that picked up Jake Reich is not picking up enough of his salary to qualify his U22 spot to be opened up. Because if you loan away a player who's on a U22 or designated player spot, the team that's loaning the player has to take on a certain amount of the salary over a certain threshold percentage for you to get the spot back to you for you to use. So essentially, as long as Jake Reich is on loan in Australia, that U22 spot of St. Louis City's is occupied. But Chris Durkin, who, as you can see, his contract's through 2025, you can see that right here under contract through, and he has an option year for 2026. But his age takes him outside of the U22 level. So the best move for them is decline the option and re-sign him to a lower deal. But either way, that's how they open up the U22 deal. And then you can see here all these contract through lengths for 2025. Even though, and obviously there's options here for some of these players, but this is what we've been talking about when we talk about all these spots open up. Because if you look at the supplemental roster and you look at contracts through 2025, obviously these young players who you've had control over, like Miguel Perez and Joey Zielinski, you're going to extend them. You're taking their options. But, Jaden Reed, Akil Watts, Michael Wenzel, Christian Olivares, who's your reserve goaltender, Haziel Orozco, do those guys get these option years picked up? That's 5 or 6 questions right now. We know that McSorley is going to get his option year picked up because he's starting right now and playing really well as a young player. Is Conrad Vollum here? That's another player who could be gone. Josh Yarrow got moved up to the senior roster to open up a supplemental roster spot for Makai Joyner. And he's another guy who we haven't seen him here in the second half. So I wouldn't expect that contract to be extended. Samir Pedro, finally, we're done with that. Ben Lunt, I actually would expect that one to get extended, even though there's not an option. Alfredo Morales, clearly Critch likes what he brings, and he brings what he brings, but is that a roster spot you need opened? Seth Antwi, another young player who got moved up to the senior roster spot to open up a supplemental roster spot for an even younger player. Do you pick up an option year on Seth Antwi? He's a guy who played really well at the MLS Next level, MLS Next Pro level at 25 years old, but is he an MLS player? And then you have Rasmus Alm. Can he ever be healthy? If not, then that 2025 contract means he's done. And then we talk about the actual big numbers here. Here's something that's interesting. And I have not mentioned this until this post-game show. This is the first time I'll be mentioning it. Is St. Louis City going to spend on the option for Henry Kessler? Because my initial reaction is I'm an idiot for even mentioning it. Of course they're going to extend Henry Kessler. I just wonder if it's going to be for a team that just spent a bunch of money on a defender in Falou Fall, for a team that has Timo Baumgartel. No, tonight's not the night to be talking about leaning on Timo Baumgartel. But for a team who has Timo Baumgartel locked up for another year and then an option for 2027, how much is this 2026 option for Henry Kessler? How big is this option? Can they afford it? Do they want to pay it with a guy who's had some injury issues this season? I'm not sure. The only other big contract we're really looking at that's ending in 2025 is Roman Berkey again. I think Chris Durkin, they're not going to pick up that option. Sang-Min John, they will be picking up that option because it makes sense because U22 contracts for his production are pretty good. And then João Klaus gets bought down after they pick up his 2026 option. So we've talked a lot about all these contracts that are open, and there are going to be a lot of changes. A lot of them are supplemental roster players or the bottom of your senior roster here. The big question for St. Louis City, in my opinion, is obviously how many of those triggers do they pull? What MLS level players do they bring in to replace those spots? How many TAM players can they add? And who replaces João Klaus as your second designated player? And who replaces Chris Durkin as your third available and active U22 player? Those are kind of my big questions. And this is where a lot of our questions kind of form from. Is looking at this roster profile. And so you hear people talk about it, that's where a lot of the stuff that we're pulling from comes from on these roster profiles. Abo, got to take a swing. No GM is going to hit on everything, and that's okay. Got to try, though. I'm shocked that a St. Louis fan is admitting that it's okay not to hit on everything. Yeah, and you got to take a swing, but just you got to be – you're not wrong. You just stop being unreasonable about the swing you expect them to take. Stop thinking that they're going to spend $10 million on a right wing this winter. It's not going to happen. That's all I'm trying to say. I demand a 20-year-old right winger, but expect that it's going to cost him $3 million, not $10 million. Expect that it's going to be a guy who develops with this team over the next couple of years and isn't, Emmanuel Latte Loth. Like that's not happening. Those big moves aren't happening. Like, maybe a Diego Rossi. I think that's a huge, that's a big one. Abu Ali, big salary, but $6-7 million. At the same time, I do want to say one thing to focus on for me is, and I just mentioned this about MLS quality players filling out the roster. I think this team needs to start looking at proved MLS quality players. And when I say that, I think the quickest way to do that is by signing players who have played in the MLS. And I think Diego Rossi is a great example. He dominates MLS right out of the gate, coming from Uruguay as a 19, 20-year-old for LAFC. He leaves for Fenerbahce in Turkey, and he's fine. And then he comes back with Crew and has hit the ground running and had 2.5 dominant seasons. I think having guys who have a track record of success in this league is a huge thing going forward, mainly because they understand this league. They understand the travel. They understand that sometimes you have to go from midfield all the way out, or midfield all the way out, excuse me. Central, you got to go from St. Louis all the way out to Seattle and then back. And then you got to go to New York the next week and then back. And then you got to go to Vancouver the next week and then back. And then it's San Diego. And then you get 2 home games. And then it's Colorado and Minnesota and then back. Like people who understand the grind of an MLS schedule across all these time zones and all this travel and things like that. We've had multiple coaches now talk about how that is a distinctive factor in MLS. So stop expecting players from second Bundesliga and Sweden and other countries to be able to handle that consistently. Yes, target the top talents from across Europe and South America. But when we talk about these 10, 15 spots in the supplemental roster, in the bottom of the roster that we need to see rounded out, I want to see MLS veterans. I want to see guys who have a track record of being healthy and playing and contributing to an MLS team. I'm fine with darts to the dartboard, but have get some clout in there for MLS players who know what they're doing in this league. This league is a weird league. people talk about how it's super offensive, and that's where everyone wants to see goals, and that's what the league's pushing, and the league's naturally going to push that way. So you should lean that way. That's a fine way to look at things. My bottom line is this league's weird, and you need to get players who understand how to play inside of this league. One of the biggest issues for St. Louis City SC over the last 3 years is they've tried to do things that other clubs have shown them the way, and I think they need to, a little bit to a point, carve out their own niche and stop following some of these trends. And in some ways, they do need to copy what these other teams are doing, but in other ways, I think they need to carve out a niche and find their own way, because bottom line is it hasn't worked. They get dominated tonight. It's 2 out of 3 years now that they're not going to be a playoff team, and they're going to have to change that. And to all the point here, talking about the offseason, it's going to have to start this offseason, and it's going to have to start within the next month or so when they hire the new sporting director. And then they're going to have to make a decision on coach. And I have no idea what the hell they're going to do about coach. Sporting director is the first thing. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Thank you to everybody who jumped in today on the show. Before we get going, I want to tell everybody about our good friends over at Home Bank, because again, we got to talk about the Home Bank money moment of the game. Listen, it's MLS players or the MLS getting one of the top players in the entire world. The money moment of the game is brought to you by Home Bank, the team behind our team at STL Sports Central. Visit myhomebank.bank or call 855-577-2001. The money moment of the game has to be right out of the gate. It was Denny Bouanga stealing it from Conrad Vollum. At that point, you knew this game was going to be dominated by LAFC, and they never looked away. Denny Bouanga and Hung Sin Man, excuse me about that, completely butchered son's name there. Those two guys have been dominant since he arrived. Bouanga has been dominant seemingly against LAFC, or seemingly against St. Louis City SC for LAFC. Every time he shows up, tonight was no different. We're giving Denny Bouanga our money moment of the game, brought to you by our friends over at Home Bank. Again, give them a call, 855-577-2001. Also, when you look forward to the future, I'm looking forward to December 1st, and that's because our friends over at DraftKings are finally going to be able to bring you their app. It's one of the best apps in the business, and I have so much fun playing with it. In fact, anytime I'm over in Illinois, you know that I'm bringing it up, and again, thankfully, on December 1st, I no longer have to worry about driving over that bridge. Finally, I can just focus on putting in and having some fun here on the St. Louis side, thanks to the DraftKings Sportsbook app. The wait is almost over for the DraftKings Sportsbook app, the America's top-rated sportsbook app, and it's coming soon, December 1st. Sign up today, though. Doesn't matter that it's not coming here December 1st. Sign up today. New Missouri customers can get $300 in bonus bets when they launch on December 1st. Download now and place a $5 bet when we go live. DraftKings Sportsbook brings you everything you need to elevate your game day, including live in-game betting, lightning fast payouts, and endless ways to get in on the action, all right from your phone. When they finally go live in Missouri, you'll be betting with the Sportsbook app, trusted by millions, safe, secure, and has fast money withdrawals. All the things you want with your Sportsbook app. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code STL Sports. It's right there up there on the screen for you guys. Code STL Sports. You have $300 in bonus bets with just a $5 bet when we go live on December 1st. That's code STL Sports in partnership with DraftKings Sportsbook. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. 21 plus. Physically present in Missouri. Eligibility restrictions apply. Bonus bets expire 7 days after issuance. Exclude customers who redeem pre-launch sign-up offer. Terms at sportsbook.draftkings.com/promos. Wrapping things up here on the STL Sports Central postgame. St. Louis City SC has 2 matches left, one more away, one more at home, and then 2025 will be mercifully over. We can finally get to that postgame or that postseason and that offseason that we are so ready to get here in St. Louis. We need change. St. Louis City needs to change things down at Energizer Park, because guaranteeing the playoffs in year 3 and completely falling on your face is going to be something that they're going to be mocked for by this fan base until they make the playoffs again. So if they want that to be a short bit of mocking, they better straighten things up, figure it out in this offseason, and get into the playoffs next year. And that'll be a lot more fun to cover here on City Central postgame next year when they're actually winning some games. Fingers crossed, knock on wood. Have a great night, St. Louis. Thanks, everybody, for joining us tonight.